Death, the Portal Home. Death on the Physical Plane by Dr. Lisa Love. In a previous video, I spoke of 6 different views of death, which includes death equals nothing, which is the materialistic paradigm where you die and you're simply worm food and that's it. There's nothing that happens after death. And that view is pretty predominant in secular society and also in Western culture. Then we have death equals what I call getting into the right club, because if you choose the right belief system or you follow the right religious teacher or the right religious teachings, then you will get into heaven. And if you don't choose the right club or the right teaching or teacher, then you get into hell. And this is supposed to be for eternity. You're always in heaven for eternity or you're always in hell for eternity. Then there's the view of death equals evolution, which simply put, you don't end up forever in heaven or hell. You get a chance to grow or evolve, either from hell through purgatory into heaven or through many heavens. Then there is death equals evolution plus resurrection, which means at some point you get to come back, either by reanimating the physical body once you've evolved enough, or by coming back into some sort of light body or resurrection body. Then there are the views followed mostly by Eastern religions, though there is an argument that they were also there in early Christianity, which has to do with reincarnation. So this view is that you evolve through many different bodies, physical bodies, and after you get to a certain level of refinement of the physical body, you no longer have to be reincarnated anymore. And that can lead to a final view. Reincarnation eventually leads to resurrection, which is after you come back in enough physical bodies and you refine them enough, you create the resurrection body, which is either perfected diamond body, physical body, or it is a light body that is able to live for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. Now, why I've given you a brief summary of this is as we go into death in the physical body, we're going to see that there's a lot of agreement about what happens at the time of physical death. One of the reasons for that is it's so easy for us to observe. Now, I want to introduce you to a model that we're going to use throughout the rest of this Death and the Afterlife series. And I'd like to tell you that the reason I'm choosing this model is that it's helpful to a limited degree with the death is nothing view. Why only to a limited degree is because after this video where we talk about death of the physical body, that view says nothing else happens, and anything you think happens is simply fantasy or brain hallucination. It's also useful to a limited degree with the right club model of death, which I'll explain more in future videos after this one, but I'm especially picking it because it's useful for all 6 models. They all fit in this model somewhere, and that's what you'll see throughout this series. So let me introduce you to this model. First of all, there are 7 stages within 7 different evolutionary larger sections, and here I've put a rectangle here for you to be able to see one major section, and we'll look at all of these sections in the next slide. And each horizontal rectangle, each major section, is said to have 7 different levels within it that also represent evolutionary stages. So there are actually 49 stages in total in this model, and each one is said to represent something that goes on both in life and in the afterlife. So let's look at the 7 different sections of this model, which are also known as planes, and they're said to be different levels of vibrational frequency. Now, as we go through this, please understand it's probably not really this kind of step-ladder approach. It's probably all interpenetrating, it's probably spherical, but for convenience sake, so that the mind has some sort of ability to create a conceptual model, this is how it's being set up. But please understand that there are limitations to this approach. So here are the 7 sections. We start first of all with the physical plane, which has to do with the physical body and the experience of the physical body. Then we have the emotional plane, which has to do with emotional life. Then we have the mental plane, which has to do with thoughts and the mind. And then the intuitional plane, which is much more than simply an intuitive hunch. Then we have the spiritual plane and 2 planes that are said to be super spiritual. Now, I'm not going to get into all the specifics in this particular video. We're only going to concentrate right now on the physical plane. But if you follow through this series, you'll get a lot more understanding of these sections. Now, in this model, you will also notice a number of triangles. There's 4 in total. And these represent stages of spiritual unfoldment, beginning with this black triangle down here. And this is what we're really going to look at in this video, because this is basically the physical body that most of us identify with, which dies, and then in the death equals nothing view, that's it. That's all there is. But in this model, there's much more, which means we look at this next triangle, this little yellow triangle, which represents the soul. Now, I'd like you to notice the word ego is in the middle of that yellow triangle. This model was developed a long time ago, and that word ego actually meant the individualized soul. Now, when I'm doing this video in 2016, we've come in popular culture to use this word ego in a totally different way. We now see it as the selfish, individualized personality that thinks only of itself and doesn't consider spiritual values. The ego is really the materialistic self as we use it now, but that's not how it was used in this model. So when you see that word ego, you can almost just replace it with the word soul. So this is development into the soul. Now notice these lines that crisscross and form this kind of hourglass here. The idea is at some point this little black triangle, you, the personality, become more and more infused with spiritual, soulful qualities so that the soul ego self is reflected into who you are, and you live as a soulful being in the world. Now, there are also 2 other levels of spiritual development represented by these 2 triangles here. And we're not going to get a lot into that in this particular video, but they represent even higher stages of spiritual development. We could say that the big triangle, which is part of the intuitional plane, is like Christ or Buddhic-like development. And then this other equilateral triangle on the top, on the what's called the monadic plane, is a state of development that is actually even beyond human in this particular model. But we're not going to worry about those quite yet. The main thing I want you to focus on is the idea behind these triangles is that at first we're too identified with our physical body, that little black triangle below. This is the materialistic paradigm. That's all I am. And when this little black triangle physical body dies, I die. That's it. None of the rest of this stuff, none of these other levels of development represented by these triangles exist. I'm just simply dead and gone. For this reason, we really can't sense or experience the higher levels, and we feel they don't exist. But as we evolve spiritually, we sense the higher levels, but here's the key, our experience of them is distorted. Notice that the reflection here of the mountaintop is distorted in the lake, and that lake is kind of our initial experience of spiritual realms. There's distortions. We don't see or sense them clearly, but eventually the more we get in touch with these higher levels, the clearer we get, the less distortion exists, until a perfect reflection is seen from the higher into the lower, from the spiritual into the physical. So even though it's been interesting to take a brief look at this model and the different levels and the triangles and briefly discuss what they mean, in this video we're going to examine primarily only on what happens with the lowest triangle, or the reflection of who we think we are as the physical body, the physical self, and how that is eventually released from the physical world. And as we do so, we are going to go step by step with what some spiritual systems state happens when the physical body lets go and passes on. Now you can see that I have taken that same model that we've looked at before, and I am focusing only now on what's known as the physical plane. So to begin with, in this model, we remember that there are 7 different levels attributed to each one of the planes. And here we have 7 different levels attributed to the physical plane, with a black triangle again standing for the appearance of any physical body that we live in. So that can be you, me, any person you meet who's in a physical body is represented by that black triangle. Now, as the body begins to die, and this can happen even a few years before the death process is finalized, this lowest level, which is known as the dense level, is also known to be associated in some spiritual traditions with the element of earth. Now, this is really important because as this dense earthly level starts to withdraw from the world, the first thing we see is that the physical body loses its density. It is no longer robust, strong, and full of vitality. And that's why I put this picture up here with these lovely women. And you can see the contrast in physical density right here in the picture. This is the death process already beginning as the earth element, that densest level, is no longer, as we said, robust, strong, and full of vitality. And over time, this dense, earthy part of us starts to lose its hair, teeth, vision, hearing, mobility, flexibility, memory, and endurance. That's part of the, quote, fun of getting older. And yet, if we learn what the death process is really about, we can actually use this as a very sacred spiritual time in our life when that little yellow triangle of the soul starts to merge more and more with that dense black physical triangle. So the latter part of life, where the dense, earthy, physical part is dying, can actually be a time of increased spirituality, transparency, as those soulful elements are shining through more brightly. Now, for many of us, this starts around the age of 60, and it lasts till approximately the age of 90. So that last third of our lives doesn't have to be a part of our life where we simply feel old and decrepit and no longer capable of doing things in the world. If we no longer judge our lives based upon the dense, earthy side with earthy vitality and earthy looking beauty, and instead we look at the spiritual side where the soul element and possibly even the higher elements are shining through, because we're no longer focused on the earthy, dense, elemental side of us, then this is really a beautiful part of our lives, and in fact, even the best part of our lives. Now, that process of the dense earthy elements disappearing from the body can last a long time. It can last 10, 20, 30 years or more. But what we're going to look at now is what happens as the body gets closer to the actual process of death. We'll see that it gets even weaker and begins to lose even more muscle mass, even bone mass, causing the person to shrink and appear smaller, or literally even be smaller. I saw this happen with both of my parents. My mom used to be my height, and I remember the first time I went to visit her, because she lived in another state in the United States, and I was so surprised because she was visibly a few inches shorter than me. And maybe you've experienced this with people you know who are in the latter part of their lives as well. We can also observe that the complexion increasingly fades, stains may appear in the teeth, the cheeks sink in, and the sense of sight recedes. Now, we can manage this a little bit as we age, and many people try to do that, but eventually at some point, as the body is reaching its final stage, it's harder and harder to manage. And in a sense, we don't care as much because we're not so concerned with the earthy, physical, dense side of who we are. We also can notice that the mind becomes more heavy, listless, agitated. It can even become delirious and drowsy. This is especially true as death is increasingly approaching. So now we're going to start to take a look at some of the inner processes that are happening when we're dealing with this dense, earthy level starting to withdraw from the physical body. And the first thing we notice is that as we look out on the world, we may start to seem confused, as if the outer world takes on a dream-like or mirage-like quality. Now, I saw this happen with my father, who left the physical body a number of months before I started this video series. And it's almost like we still have enough brain coherency. And my father was a very logical person. And it's like we're looking out on a desert, and we know that there shouldn't be a well of water there, an oasis of water, but we know that that can happen, but it doesn't seem logical that it is happening. And so it starts to get very confusing. And my father did this. He would ask me, am I crazy? Because he would start to see and sense things that his logical mind told him shouldn't exist. They could exist, but they really shouldn't exist. So he was very disorientated. Now, when this stage begins to occur, we're also told that the Alta Major Center, found at the back of the brain, is activated. Now, we don't have a lot of understanding of what happens with this Alta Major Center. It's said to be related to the medulla in the back of the brain, and it's said in spiritual literature to have something to do with the storehouse of memories, not only of this life, but some say also of other lives. But let's just say it's only this life for now. And it could be that this is why we see people begin a review of the events of their life, which is preparing them actually for impending death to come. Now, usually when we're in this stage, we have a period of about 1 year or less before death will happen. And I know I did this with my father. I worked to consciously help him review his life. And I encouraged my mother, who didn't know a lot about this stuff at all, but I started to teach her a little bit about it. But I encouraged her to just simply start a life review. And my father was very comforted. And she would read him stories of their lives. And we put up pictures of his life and his children to help give him not only a sense of comfort, because remember, at this stage, they're starting to get confused as to where they are. So seeing pictures of family and friends, and he was a photographer, so we put up some of his favorite photographs. You know, it helps to anchor them, to keep them still here, because they're kind of mostly still here. And hearing about his life, and she would read him things that he had written about his life. He had started an autobiography, and I read some of that to him. And then she would read him cards and events from his life. Really helped him to kind of sum up his life and get a sense of what his life was about. And that is very important at this particular stage of withdrawal from the dense, earthy sense of who we are. So now we're going to look at the next level, which is known as the liquid level. And this is also where the water element is emphasized in its connection with the functions of water in the body. And what we see here with people is that they begin to lose control of their bodily fluids. They may become incontinent, dribble and drool, the nostrils may cave in, and they may experience the tongue getting thicker and the lips getting thinner. And all of this is signs that we're beginning to detach not only from the dense physical, but from the water liquid part of who we are as a physical being. So we've talked a little bit about what happens to the physical body that all of us can see as we're starting to withdraw the liquid or water from the body. What's going on the inside? Well, one of the things that we're told in some spiritual traditions is that the mind becomes more and more confused. It can even be fearful and anxious because the sensations are dulled, and therefore the outer world seems increasingly misty or smoky or foggy, or even hazy is another word to describe it. And I've put up a picture here to kind of represent this. This is London, but you can tell that you kind of have a sense what it is if you're familiar with London, but it doesn't really look as clear. And so you're not sure, am I here? Am I there? Where is there? Why does everything always seem kind of misty or smoky or hazy out there? Am I there? Am I here? You can really get a sense of how confused the person may be at this stage. Now, some systems of thought say that the pituitary gland, which I am circling for you here, with its capacity to coordinate thoughts, feelings, and actions, starts to decay, leading to a more disorganized and confused way of being. The person oftentimes will not seem like themselves. I know that my father started to say things that seemed outlandish, and yet they were partial truths to what he was saying. They were just distorted, and we were having to help him be a little clear, or having to be really patient with him and not try and clear him up, just be patient with the stories that he was telling. But I saw that disorganized, confused way of talking about his life, sharing his life, relating to himself, relating to us, happening at the same time that he was going through this stage. Now, if you're a materialist, this can be very confusing because you no longer seem like yourself, and you don't know that there's another self, a soul, a spiritual realm. You don't believe in that. So this can be a very difficult stage to be in. But if you tend to be a spiritual being and you think there's something after life, you may actually see people going into deeper spiritual practice at this time. And finally, when this stage is reached, we are told that death of the physical body is usually 6 months or less from taking place, when the liquid and water is starting to leave the body. So the next stage has to do with the gaseous, and I'm highlighting it for you here, or fire element connected with the body and the functions of heat starting to withdraw. We've seen the density of the body, we've seen the liquid of the body, and now we're going to see the heat of the body withdrawing. And at this stage, we're told that the body alternates between feeling very hot and very cold. And the mouth and nose start to become very dry. We're told we can no longer drink or eat. The limbs are growing colder, and the upper or lower body also becomes cold. And often at this stage, we're told that we're unable to recognize family and friends. We're forgetting their names. We may feel like we're more out of the world than in it. Now, if you're in the one view of death is nothing, the materialistic view, this is just simply going to be interpreted as the person is exiting the body and the brain is dying, and that's that. But if you believe that there are other things going on here, the 5 other views of what happens after death, then you're going to realize that the person is more in the spiritual realms increasingly than in the physical, increasingly identified with who they are as a spiritual being instead of as a physical being. And they may come out of that stage and talk to you, or they may stay asleep a lot. Now, it's really important, however, to consider that the person may be aware of what's going on. So when you are a caregiver or your family or friend member around this person, it's important to treat them just like somebody who's in a coma. People in comas often report that even though it appeared as if they weren't there, they heard what people were saying. They sensed and saw even what was going on in the room. So it's very important to act as if the person is still aware, even though the person seems unaware. And I actually saw this with my father, and I started to encourage the caregivers around him to act as if he could sense and hear what was going on. And sometimes he would say things that validated that. He'd kind of open his eyes and come out of a little bit and make a comment where we understood that he was in fact aware of what we were saying and doing. So it's very, very important to act as if the person is awake and conscious, even though they don't seem to be. Now, what is going on the inside? This is harder to tell because the person is not able to really communicate this to us very well. So what some spiritual traditions tell us is that the world around us is increasingly dissolving. And we are told it dissolves into a kind of reddish black space filled with images like sparks or fireflies. Now, this isn't so hard to imagine. If you close your eyes, many of us know the kind of spots that we see, like little lights that appear with our eyes closed. So this is similar. Number one, the person often has their eyes closed. And even when the eyes open, the world seems increasingly spotty-like. And that's why I think these descriptions in spiritual traditions from a long time back describe this particular spark or firefly kind of like view of the outer world happening. Some systems of thought also say that the pineal gland, and I'm circling that here, which is photoreceptive, is decaying, and that's causing sparks of light to be seen. We're also told that the pineal gland is hallucinogenic, so the person may be having visions of angels, or depending upon if they're in a spiritual tradition, they may see Jesus coming, or Mary, or if they're of a different belief system, different kinds of Hindu gods, or they may see the Buddha, or they may see a spiritual teacher. If they're not particularly oriented to a spiritual tradition, I know one person that started to see loved ones that had passed over at that time. But it's not uncommon for these kinds of things to be happening at this stage. Now, the materialists say that's just a phenomena of the pineal gland. That's all that's going on, and we shouldn't really pay any attention to it. It's just part of the brain dying. But those of us that are oriented towards spiritual beliefs of what happens after death see these things as real. Just because we've got the television on and we're seeing things in the television doesn't mean all of that is within the television. The announcer doing the broadcast isn't in the television. The announcer is somewhere else projecting into the television. And those of us that are not materialists say that these seeming hallucinations are really projections of beings that may actually exist projecting through the television or the brain. Now, when this process is happening, it is said that death is likely to happen within a month or less. Next, we are told that the etheric, and I'm highlighting it here, or the wind or air element, emphasized with the functions of breathing, start to leave the body. So we've had, kind of going over things again real fast, the physical density of the body leave, the liquid of the body leave, the gaseous or heat, fiery aspect of the body leave, and now the etheric, which is called the fourth ether in this model, or the air quality of the body is starting to leave. And at this stage, breathing is becoming very labored and difficult. Inhalations are usually very short. There's that rasping sound, panting may occur, and what is known as the death rattle may be heard, which is actually a gurgling sound that occurs as fluids accumulate more in the lungs. The eyes may also roll up. This is actually an actor here. When I found these pictures, I thought, oh my gosh, they're taking photos of people who are actually dying. But then I saw pictures of this person walking around and totally healthy. But I think he did a very good acting job of illustrating this process, especially with the eyes rolling up. So bravo to him. So what is going on the inside at this level? And again, this is very hard to really understand, though there are spiritual traditions that have taken some time to really attempt to master and see what's going on here. So let's talk about them. Inwardly, we're being told that the world is being swept away. It's almost like a great wind starting to sweep everything away. One's life, one's memories, it's all going. And typically the person is mostly in an unconscious state, very confused and bewildered by what's being experienced, unless they have a strong spiritual practice. And there are even those spiritual practitioners who know, we're told, how to move through this process in a conscious way on the inner realms. Visions and hallucinations may be happening much more frequently. They started at the previous stage, having to do with the gaseous, heat, fiery elements, but they're happening even more. And this can be either good or bad, depending on the life the person lived. If they have bad memories, those things may be seen and then swept away. If they have good memories, seen and swept away. We're also told that those sparks that were like fireflies are becoming more and more concentrated, like a butter lamp flame. And I have a picture of that here, and there's actually a couple wicks in this picture. It'd probably be better if there was only one flame, which we're told is the precursor to the experience of the tunnel of light. And when these signs take place, the person is likely to pass within a few weeks to possibly even 1 or 2 days. Now it's interesting because my father, who was passing away, I realized was starting to head into this labored breathing stage, and I let my family know that I thought he was going to pass that day or within the next day. And I actually had an experience of him coming and saying goodbye to me. Materialists will have a hard time with this, but I had an experience of him saying goodbye to me hours before my mother called and said he had just passed. So now we're going to look at the stage where the person still has a physical body. You still see the physical body there, but modern medicine has considered the person to be dead. And in the model that we're using, this is now the stage where the third ether, we were in the fourth ether before with the last breath. Now we're at the third etheric level of the model that we're using. This is still part of the physical plane, but it's now considered physical, etheric, or subtle levels. And this is connected in some spiritual traditions to the element of ether or space. The person has gone through earth, water, fire, air, and is now in the ether or in space. Dense, liquid, gaseous, fourth ether, third ether, or space. So the person has exhaled the last breath, leaving the body motionless, with the brain and heart activity having stopped. In other words, materialists say you're dead. But in the models that we're using, a lot more is going on here, and we're going to explore that. This is also the level where a lot of the NDE or near-death experiences are taking place, which means although the person was said to be dead, he or she will come back to life and report a lot of interesting phenomena that we're learning about through a lot of research with near-death experiences. So before I go on, I would like to talk about a couple other elements that are talked about in a number of spiritual traditions. And this has to do with something we call the consciousness thread and the life thread. The consciousness thread is connected to the brain, the life thread to the heart. And these are important in the following ways. If the person is going to have a near-death experience and come back, only the consciousness thread will be detached. This is the link to the brain that detaches and reattaches every night as we go to sleep. We're conscious, we go to sleep, we're unconscious. We wake up, we're conscious again, at least in this physical realm. Now, this can also result in apparent brain death, though one has not completed the death process totally yet. Why do I say that? Because modern medicine assumes that we're dead when the brain is dead. We flatlined. Brain is dead. And that is not how it used to be seen in a lot of spiritual traditions. The most important organ of the body wasn't the brain, it was the heart. But in our modern world now, we consider the heart to not be much. It just pumps blood. It's just a pump. It has no intelligence the way the brain does. Well, that is being challenged by a group called Heart Math, which is doing a lot of research in the heart and has even got videos that you can watch where you see that the heart seems to be actually sending messages to the brain. So it could be that the heart is the main organ of thought or consciousness. And that fits with what spiritual traditions have believed actually for thousands of years. So somebody is not really dead until the life thread is disconnected, I should say, from the heart. So when the consciousness thread is disconnected from the brain and the life thread is disconnected from the heart, we are truly dead. Until that happens, we will have near-death experiences where we can come back. Now, a lot of near-death experiences involve, we're told, a life review, being able to travel about in a flash of thought, entering a dark space, and seeing a tunnel of light. So these are all things that you can read about in the near-death literature, and these again are said to be related to the third ether of the physical plane. And here we have, however, the idea that if the person is not meant to return, they will actually go up to the tunnel of light and go through it. So it's not just seeing the tunnel or being drawn to the tunnel or being surrounded by light and talking to family or friends, which we see in near-death experiences. It is actually going through the tunnel completely to the other side, we are told. And that lifts us up into the second and the first ethers of the physical plane. And at that point, the heart thread or link to the body is said to be completely broken. And with the life and consciousness threads detached, there is no opportunity of return. And the physical body starts to totally break apart and decay. So, as I said, as we move into the second and first ethers, which you see I've circled here now, the body is decaying, and that's why a lot of systems say we really should wait at least 72 hours before we do cremation or start the process of taking care of the remains of the body, because during that time of about a 3-day period, a lot of spiritual traditions say the person can return. So we have to be careful to know that they're really dead beyond just what science says. For those who have built up a spiritualized physical body while alive, we're even told that the body may take a long time to start the process of decay. For weeks even, the body may appear as if it is still alive, with the normal signs of decay not being there. And this is why it's said that there are saints and sages and lamas or gurus who are highly advanced who give us real evidence of this happening. We do not see the signs of decay for at least 3 days or a week or sometimes even longer than that. And it is also said that when we create the resurrection body, It is made up of the substance of these two planes, the first and second ethers. So we have to be really advanced to be able to work in the first and second ethers in a conscious way, where we can manifest an emanation, a projection of the physical body, either as a light body or reconstitute the physical body altogether, a concept that will seem absurd and ridiculous to materialists. But as I said, at this point, we're not dealing with that anymore. So if you're a materialist watching this video, you're going to have to keep an open mind. You can just simply stop watching the videos altogether. And I hope you got something out of what you did see, because from now on, we're going to need that open mind to be able to continue. That's the end of this video on death and the physical plane, and to let you know, the photos were purchased for use from 123rf.com. The narration was done by myself, Dr. Lisa Love, and you can learn more about me at drlisalove.com.